So we'll just kind of wing this. If Springer isn't coming, we'll just adjust the order of things. It'll be fine.
And your main question for him, I could speak to it indirectly if he doesn't end up making it too.
Okay, that sounds good.
Standard question answer that we get a lot.
Mhm.
All right, it's 2:00. We'll go ahead and get this virtual panel started. My name's Danny Bierschwal with the Big Sky Resort Area District. Thank you so much for joining us for a vibrant discussion today with experts in the field of emergency management. Today is our second virtual panel. We just wrapped up a water supply discussion, which is going to be available online, and we're in day 2 of Community Week activity here in Big Sky. All of the information and recordings are available on bigskycommunityweek.com. So if you're unable to join the conversation today, we certainly have the opportunity to stay connected and keep you informed after the fact. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator today for this discussion. Many of you know him. He's a neighbor and a good friend of Big Sky, Mr. Joe O'Connor, who is now congratulations on the new role, the managing editor of Mountain Journal. So with that, want to turn it over to Mr. Joe to guide us through this discussion today.
Appreciate that, Danny. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on emergency management, a part of Community Week put together by Big Sky Resort Area District and Big Sky Chamber of Commerce. As Danny mentioned, I'm Joe O'Connor, managing editor for Mountain Journal. We're a nonprofit public interest conservation journalism site dedicated to saving the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. For your information, our stories are free online at mountainjournal.org. Emergency management is a critical topic and one that holds particular importance for me. As a former ski patroller and wildland firefighter, I've been on the ground during emergency scenarios, and as a resident of Big Sky, I'm as curious as the rest of you and interested about our emergency management plan and protocols. In the West, we know how serious natural disasters can be. Wildfire, earthquakes, devastating flooding like we saw last spring in Southwest Montana and Yellowstone National Park. In Big Sky, we have a unique scenario. We have a one-way in, one-way out situation with Highway 64, dead-ending at Moonlight Basin. Many of you have asked the questions, what do we do in an emergency requiring an evacuation? How will we know? What preparations can we make? So here with me today to answer these questions are the people who make those calls. Patrick Lonergan serves as Chief of Emergency Management and Fire for Gallatin County. Greg Meagard is Chief of the Big Sky Fire Department. Joe Brummel is with us, Director of Disaster and Emergency Services for Madison County. And Caleb Schreiber is Zone Fire Management Officer for the Custer Gallatin National Forest. We are hoping that Sheriff Dan Springer with Gallatin County can join us. He's here. Excellent. Sheriff Springer, welcome. And welcome to all of you. We only have an hour, so I'd like to remind our panelists to please keep your responses to 5 minutes or less. We'll have a short amount of time at the end of our discussion for audience questions. You can submit these questions on Facebook or Zoom, and we'll hold them until the end of our conversation. And as Danny mentioned, a recording of this discussion will be available tomorrow morning at bigskycommunityweek.com. With that, let's get started. Joe and Patrick, I'd like to start with you. Patrick, maybe we'll start with you first. So a quick hit here. You guys, have been in the thick of a lot of, emergency scenarios planning. Were there any lessons that you learned from the historic flooding in Southwest Montana this spring?
Sure. There's a couple takeaways, and it's nothing new. I mean, they're the same messages that you typically hear officials give time and time again. The number one is everybody's be self-sufficient with what you need to stand alone for a given period of time. And, we saw that in our neighbors next door, Park County, and they got kind of lucky there for a while, it looked like Gardner was gonna be in a world of hurt and cut off for an extended period of time. And that would have been very logistically challenging to support that community by air, with the amount of people that were in it. So, whether you're stuck because of a flood or whatever the situation, we really encourage people to be self-sufficient with whatever those needs that they are for themselves, that they need for themselves and their family and their pets and whatever that may be. And plan on taking care of yourself for, at least 72 hours, because it takes time to get help. And there will always be those that need immediate help. And the more self-sufficient you are, the better it is for your overall community, and allows the emergency officials to focus on those that truly need that immediate support if you can hold out for a little while. And another takeaway is that as much as we like to pride ourselves on, we'll take care of our communities, we're resilient, we'll respond to the emergency with our stuff locally. At a certain point, any community is overcome with their capacity to respond locally, and it relies upon your neighbors supporting you from neighboring jurisdictions, the state and the federal agencies coming in. And largely speaking, a huge piece that sometimes is overlooked when we talk about recovery and communities getting back to normal, that's our nonprofit partners. I mean, they are a linchpin to private individuals getting support quickly and getting help to try and get their life back to normal as quickly as possible. So while those may not be unique or new to our flooding, they were definitely reinforced. And I guess those are the takeaways that I would throw out. And I'll pass it over to Joe to add to that.
Yeah, sure, Joe. Any thoughts there specifically? Just quickly, Patrick, you mentioning, being self-sufficient as best you can, being prepared and having, supplies and everything for, up to 72 hours is sort of like airlines, saying when the oxygen masks come down, put it on yourself first, because you're not going to be of help to anyone without it. But anyway, without further ado, Joe Brummel.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of sentiments Patrick said, but it's being self-sufficient. We can rely on each other's, and it's a good thing about Southwest Montana. Neighbors are always there to step up and help out when and where they can. But even that we see on the local stage and what's at the national stage right now, regardless if it's a flood or whatever event, even if FEMA does come in, they don't have a magic wand to wave. They're not going to make everything better right away. It's kind of a long-term event. And we always like to really plan for the worst, but always try and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. That's a good point. Patrick, a follow-up for you quickly. You're the head of the Gallatin County Emergency Management. You've been working on emergency planning for years. Who makes the evacuation plan, and who ultimately decides what happens in the face of an emergency?
You bet. So, ideally, and we strive really hard to make all of our emergency plan development very collaborative with all the agencies that have jurisdiction. And that agencies having jurisdiction is a very, very key term when we talk about emergency planning and authorities, but basically it means it's a legal entity that has some sort of charge in state law that says you're responsible for this function. And then there's a whole assortment of supporting organizations that help those lead agencies that have the authority to carry out that tasking. And so we work very hard amongst those agencies having jurisdiction, the supporting agencies, our elected officials, to ensure that we have common processes in place, mm-hmm. and that roles and responsibilities are clearly delineated in the plans, so that we have consistency across all our organizations as best as possible. So mm-hmm. the process is the same. So it doesn't matter whether you have a Bozeman police officer coming down to Big Sky, or you have, a trooper or a sheriff's deputy to help with an incident. Hopefully they're operating largely in the same fashion, using the same terminology. They have the same expectations of authorities and who's in charge, and that structure and how we do evacuations in Gallatin County. So it's consistent, not only for the responders carrying out their mission, but also for the residents that are being given instructions and interacting with them. In Montana, the core of the Montana Code annotated, when you talk about disasters, really lies with the governing bodies of the political subdivisions. So that's the municipalities, and then in the unincorporated areas, the county commissioners. And so ultimately, those typically are the people that sign and formally promulgate and adopt those emergency plans. Sometimes some of these specific plans are very specific authorities and other people will sign on to them. But at a certain point, it just becomes impractical to have everybody that has a piece of the pie sign every single document. So typically you'll see those mayors and those county commissioners be the ones that are the final signatory authority on these planning documents dealing with large scale emergencies. When it comes to decisions during a large incident, again, those decisions come down to the authorities spelled out in those emergency plans. And in some cases, it's very clear. There's very specific statutory authorities that a given individual, such as the sheriff, may have. In other cases, those authorities are spelled out in the plan and delegated to a certain individual. So there's some functions in large disasters that are not statutorily defined, but they're functions that the counties and the cities need to carry out and support. And those get delegated to a given individual or entity through the adoption of that planning document. Look at my notes here real quick here. A key player at the strategic level when we talk about large scale disasters are what state law calls principal executive officer. And that's the mayor or the chairman of the Board of County Commissioners. And that principal executive officer is the one that in statute is charged with supplemental powers during a disaster or a declared emergency to carry out things such as curfews, evacuations, suspending, policies, stuff like that. And so typically that's kind of a lot of these things come back to the principal executive officer. However, the caveat of Montana Code annotated is that it's not always that clean. And it says those powers must be implemented through a proclamation or a resolution. And then if you read what it takes to do that, it takes the unanimous vote, not unanimous vote, it takes a majority vote of the governing body. So we talk about the principal executive officer being, the front person and the one with this authority. But for them to enact that, it takes that governing body's action to really truly implement some of those large scale disaster powers. Yeah, so that's kind of the real gist of kind of emergency planning. We try really hard to be collaborative across all the agencies. We work, very closely with those that specifically have authorities in state law and those that support it. When we encourage anybody that has interest that's a partner agency in some response fashion when we're working on that portion of the plan to participate and provide feedback. And for some agencies, it's very specific and it's not a big lift. And for some agencies, that's a pretty big lift and we appreciate their participation. You talk about the sheriff's office, they have a little piece of a lot of different things. So they're a major planning partner with us. And then there's other agencies that, have one little piece that they're responsible for and they do that very well. But we appreciate everybody's participation as we're trying to develop this, maintain it, and keep everybody up to speed on what the game plan is.
Yeah, thank you. Well, governing agencies having to sign off on things, on a plan or on a specific scenario. I mean, I imagine in an emergency, these things need to happen pretty quickly. And it does sound like there's a lot of collaboration going on. That's key. I'll jump over to you, Sheriff Springer. What is the sheriff's department's sort of role in these scenarios? And I guess that can shift, but just curious, where you come into play and in what situation.
Yeah, so Patrick's stuff was mostly kind of like the MCA thing. The reality of it is when these occur and they're in an emergency situation, we're not going to have a commission meeting and everyone vote and whatnot. So this happens fairly quickly. The state partners, the emergency management, obviously they have kind of the authority to set those pre-planning and all those, but the reality comes down to what occurs on the street. And typically that's in conjunction with either another law enforcement agency that's there, if it happens to be in, say, the city of Bozeman. But in this instance, we're talking about mostly the Big Sky area, and it would also fall on the sheriff's office as well as the fire department. And so between myself and Chief Meagard, there would be significant communication as to what it is that we're going to be doing in that particular scenario. The instance of Park County was exactly that. I mean, obviously there's a ton of sheriffs started sending bodies that way. We had, I don't know how many deputies from across the state that ended up over in Park County.
Hmm.
There's, as well as even some local officers from here as well. So as those things build out, there is plans for that. We have a statewide mutual aid program that is established
Mhm.
through Montana Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. It's actually a Gallatin County employee that manages that. And so a call goes out, and we had, you know, they got the National Guard helicopters there for us. They had all the other sheriffs showing up with people. So there's a fairly significant, fairly robust plan in place to get bodies there. But to Patrick's point, everyone here lives in a rural community, and it doesn't matter if you're in Billings or if you're in Big Sky or if you're in Ekalaka. It's ultimately, there is going to be a time there where you are going to have to be self-sufficient, and you're seeing that in Florida. They obviously have the resources available to them that we don't have, but there's plenty of people there that had to be self-sufficient for a number of days. And so it's pretty standard, and it's going to be the same way here.
Sure. All right. Well, so how is the public notified about maybe an evacuation or what they should do in an emergency specifically?
Sure. I think people have it they have a picture in their head of what an evacuation means. And it looks like an interstate full of traffic for 25 miles, right? That's pretty rare. That is not typically what evacuations look like. And at least in this area,
Mhm.
the chances of evacuating an entire area of Big Sky is pretty slim. Typically it would look like a subdivision, a location. It's not going to be what an example is the Bridger Foothills fire down here.
Yeah.
We're not evacuating the entire Gallatin County into some other area, right? So we're very focused on a very narrow area of Gallatin County. So how does that look? The notification, there is obviously all the social media sites. There are a lot of, and Patrick could probably help me on the names of some of these, but there are where we can open up your cell phone in a particular area to say, and it opens up. It doesn't have, that's not one of those that you have to actually sign up for. But once we draw the circle, the geomap, it can open up every cell phone in that geomap. And there's a message that says we get to create the message, right? So we send the message that says whatever it is that we want them to do. This is the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. There's been X, Y, and Z. We ask that you drive southbound towards 191 or whatever, right? On 191, whatever the case may be, we can give directions that way. There's plans in place to get some reader boards up that way. So there's lots of different ways to get that information out. There's no one particular way, because if there's one particular way, that means there's a capability of a system failure.
Mm.
And so there has to be multiple different ways. So some of that is also door to door.
Mhm.
We've done that plenty too, where we have to go door to door to particular locations. That takes, about 5 minutes per door. So if we're going door to door and we've got, whatever number of deputies, depends on how many houses we're knocking on, but we figure about 5 to 8 minutes per house.
Hmm.
And also depends on how many questions they ask us. So anyway, but 5 to 8 minutes is what we're looking at. So we've done that plenty across the state as well, and here locally as well. So the deputies are pretty versed in doing the actual evacuation portion of that. The decision to do an evacuation is typically made at the street level in conjunction with commissioner's approval. We'll talk to them on the phone. As Patrick said, the chairman would hear that and make a decision. They then go and do their community or their political part of that. But at the street level, we're going to continue if it's an emergency evacuation situation. Obviously, we can't force people out of their homes. That's not what we do. But we can notify them that this might be the last time you hear from us. And
Sure.
we'll come back. You heard it. You saw that in Florida. That happens all across the country as well. So
I was just going to bring that up in terms of, Hurricane Ian and, other hurricanes specifically. You hear of people who, there's a mandatory evacuation and they don't evacuate. I mean, I guess mandatory just means it's, it's now up to you, right?
the mandatory thing is, I can't drag someone from their house,
Enforce
right?
it. Yeah.
Right. And that I would never want to. The mandatory notification though is essentially that at this point forward, you're not going to get any more emergency assistance until it's safe to do so. It's a notification that we recognize a threat's coming and things are going to change, and we're not going to put people in that kind of harm's way after this point. So that's but that's kind of what those are. And yeah, they call them mandatory, but yeah, that's what they are. The recognize, that there are only so many responders. The state does not really have like a response ready organization. The sheriff's office has that, the local fire departments have that. The emergency management is a response organization in management. They'll help us, and they're awesome about getting like those state resources that are out there. If it's a wildland fire, yes, there are resources, but those are hours away, right? So things happen quicker than that. So there are, even the federal government doesn't really have like emergency response groups.
Right.
FEMA is a 3 to 7 day event to get there. That's not what I would classify as emergency response. So recognize that there are limitations to what's available to people. As far as evacuations go, Big Sky is a fairly simple one. I mean, there's certain 2 routes out, and by the same token, there's lots of other things we can do with evacuations. We do all across the country. They're doing a lot more of these shelter in place type evacs. And there's a lot of shelter in place locations in Big Sky that make a ton of sense. We've marked those out on maps. Those have been handed out to the Big Sky area. Patrick's office has done a great job with that. And so is Joe's. And so those are kind of, it all is very dependent upon the event itself.
Yeah, sure.
You guys see every day what a large evacuation looks like in the Big Sky area, from about, what is it, 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock up there.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. I mean, you back all the way up to Lone Peak, right? Or to Lone Mountain Ranch. So that's what it looks like to try and get people out of location. Now, obviously, if it's an emergency situation, we can possibly close some lanes on 191 and make it a 2-lane highway down. That would take some deputies to close off some intersecting routes and whatnot. So there's things that we can do to make it quicker, but that's what it looks like.
Got it. Well, thank you, Sheriff Springer, for that. I'd like to hop over to you, Chief Meagard. Have you talk a little about Big Sky Fire Department's role in emergency planning, and how has the department been training and preparing for a potential large-scale emergency like, a wildfire in Big Sky, for example?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. So we train every day for, large-scale incidents. Going back to what Sheriff Springer and Patrick said, it's a collaboration of entities getting together. We have a plan. We sit down, do a tabletop exercise, pull in players that we typically wouldn't have at the table. When you look at Yellowstone Club, Fire Department, the security built, Spanish Peaks, Moonlight Security, pulling them into a tabletop because they're going to be assisting law enforcement or fire, whatever it is. Going back to when you look at an incident, we talk whether it's an MCI plan, wildland, avalanche, you can name it. We practice these drills. I believe Patrick has one coming up this week that practices a large scale incident. It's going to have in multiple agencies to come in and participate. The key is building relationships and collaborating, because we don't want to have to develop a relationship when an incident happens while it's happening. We do that beforehand. Everybody on this panel today, we all know each other personally. We work together every day. We collaborate. If we have an incident in Big Sky or anywhere in Gallatin or Madison County, there's a unified command system. So, the sheriff's office is not working in a silo. Big Sky Fire is not. The Forest Service. We're all sitting down, working together, come up with a plan what's best for everybody. And so, like I said, we don't do big scale incidents every day, but we talk about response every day and how we're going to handle that. Sheriff Springer and law enforcement, as he said, they're going to be working on evacuation. We're going to be doing the initial attack, dealing with that, trying to help out wherever we can, along with the Forest Service and anybody else that's coming. And so you think about evacuation, getting people out, think about us trying to get those resources in. We have a county mutual aid agreement that we can bring resources in. There's a statewide mutual aid agreement as Sheriff Springer spoke to. So we're not only trying to get some people out of here, but we're trying to get a lot of resources in here too. So that's a fine balance to really manage that.
Got it. Well, I think, I believe it was Sheriff Springer said a little earlier, there certainly there could be an incident that would require the evacuation of all of Big Sky, for example, but most of the time, likely not. Tell me a little about, the Jack Creek Road egress and when there might be a scenario when that might be employed.
I'm going to defer to Patrick and the sheriff on that because, like I said, they will be managing that, Joe. We certainly be in that unified discussion about when that is, but that's not one person making that decision. That would be, a team doing that. But I'll defer to Patrick or Sheriff Springer for that because really that's going to fall into their arena when that determination is made.
Yeah, Patrick or Sheriff Springer want to field that one?
I'll take a crack at it. I think the answer is that it comes down to what the situation is. And,
Sure.
if the smarter route is to go out through Moonlight because of some sort of road obstruction due to whatever, on 191, that's an option. Or the other option could be, there's a significant flow out and maybe you're splitting the traffic to go both directions. Greg mentioned it, there's a challenge of getting people out if that's the smart route to go to move large amounts of people out of the community, but we also need to be able to get response personnel into the community at the same point in time. And where that's funneling one responder one direction and residents out the other direction, or keeping both lanes open on 181, that'll depend on what's going on at that point in time.
Sure.
One of the big things you see, especially in large wildfires, around the West in recent years, a lot of the injuries and fatalities have come from people trying to drive out of the community rather than staying put when the fire front's coming through. And, that's an important thing to keep in mind is if you're told to leave, there's a reason the officials are telling you to leave. If you're told to stay where you're at, there's a reason they're telling you to stay where you're at. And a lot of the times, people are told to leave and they're like, oh, how bad can it be? And they stick around and then they try and leave when it's no longer safe to leave. And that's when problems occur with people getting injured trying to leave, and it obstructs the responders from getting in and dealing with whatever the situation is. So, kind of like being self-sufficient, we also ask you to trust us when, the sheriff says, take this action. There's a reason he's telling you to do that. And you should really consider doing that. So I guess I'll stop at that point. And if Dan wants to add to that.
Anything to add there, Dan?
I think you're exactly right, Patrick. And I guess the only thing I would add is that's also why we can't say if, here's the exact plan that we're going to do for this evacuation. And Big Sky has been kind of really wanting that. And it really, really depends on what the event is. And so Patrick's point is exactly right, that if there might come a time where we say, we need to get you down the road, or it might be a time where we say, we need y'all to park right here. And, wildland fires are a great example of that. They moonscape the fuels, but they won't typically moonscape, green, grassy areas. And so it might not be fun. It might not be very comfortable, but, some of us there's tons of videos of like when guys had to ride out fires in like Yellowstone and Old Faithful. And one of my deputies was there actually during that. And so, there are safe spots and it's kind of an uncomfortable position to be in, but you're safe and the fire can blow over and then we'll work from there. So there's lots of different scenarios out
The golf course is pretty close to me.
there. That's a great place. Hole 7 or something like that.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, thank you guys both for that. Chief Meagard brought up the interlocal agreement. Joe Brummel, I'd like to move over to you here. So yes, Gallatin and Madison counties recently signed an interlocal agreement to consolidate emergency services. Can you talk a little about that agreement?
Well, sure. It's a portion of where it actually solidifies the agreements between both counties on the top-down level. That's where the commissioners all came to the table and identified the need for it and solidifying the plan. It kind of mirrors the plan that's already in place by either dispatch or the sheriff coverage in the area, but also designates kind of a funding source to put that an emergency management plan, or what it takes everyone's responding agencies plans, consolidates those and best suits the agency or the community that it serves. So why not have Gallatin County, which they already have the agencies there, they already have the responders there. It just makes complete utter sense to have the plans that they already have in place the mitigations and the risks already identified in place. It just solidifies those agreements. It puts a funding source to assist with those agreements. We're not going to be hands off. We're not wiping our hands away from it.
Sure.
If any time they need help, it goes back to relationships that have been built for years and years between both counties. We all work great together. We get along together. And it's just a portion. It makes just clean, good, common sense to have Gallatin County, since the major port of Big Sky is in that area. Responding agencies are there. Let's have them take the lead on it, and we'll be there to help out any way and every way we can.
Excellent. Yeah, nice work on getting to that place. It makes total sense. Caleb Schreiber, thanks for joining us, and thanks for your patience getting to you. But I was curious, how does the U.S. Forest Service work with local agencies in the event of a wildfire per se?
So
What does that look like?
it looks like, a number of different things, but largely they referred to unified command earlier. So if we have a wildland urban interface type of fire where, there's potential for structures to be involved or a community is at risk, we're definitely going to be engaging in some sort of unified command if, again, we have protection responsibilities in that area. So locally here on the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, the Bozeman and Hebgen districts, our protection areas look mostly like covering National Forest System lands, but also the Big Sky community itself has a lot of protection that we are responsible for as the National Forest. And that's through some offset agreements and other types of agreements held at the state and other levels where some other agencies protect some National Forest System lands and things like that. So we work really closely with Big Sky Fire and Gallatin County and Madison County and all of our other partners, both in the pre-planning events and then when an actual fire occurs. Even small, so we've had a number of small fires, for example, in the Big Sky area this year. And, we work with Big Sky Fire. Oftentimes our resources are further away from the Big Sky area. We have 2 engines in West Yellowstone and 2 engines in Bozeman. And so Big Sky Fire Department is obviously much closer to that area. So they'll respond on National Forest System lands. And as well as we'll come up to Big Sky and respond on private lands within Big Sky that fall under our protection. But oftentimes, the Big Sky Fire Department is the first one on scene in those areas, and will come in if needed or needed to assist, and vice versa. So we have a good interagency agreement in place and good working relationships across those boundaries.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you mentioned one thing, the wildland urban interface, that I think warrants a bit more discussion. With an increasing populace, with people building more homes in, the wildland urban interface, have you, or you specifically, or the Forest Service, noticed a change in the way you're fighting wildfires, or, is there been an increase in structure protection as opposed to getting after the fire itself?
So I would say that's more driven by maybe climate change and fuel buildup and some of those types of things, lessons learned from tragedy fires that we've had and that type of stuff, than it is directly related to the urban interface, though that definitely plays a factor in there. We still have an aggressive initial attack and an extremely successful initial attack rate, as far as 99% of fires are caught small. It's really the 1% that cause 99% of the damage and that you hear about. So we still definitely have an aggressive initial attack. We do try to manage landscape as well. So where it is feasible to do so, we may look at opportunities to manage a natural ignition to meet resource objectives as outlined in our forest management plans. But in the Custer-Gallatin and on the zone that I'm responsible for, those opportunities are hard to find. We have successfully done that in the past, but we don't have large contiguous blocks of land, and we have a lot of values kind of surrounding some of those areas, let's say as compared to like the Bob Marshall Wilderness or some of the other places where that's more frequently done.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. We've been talking a little about this. The collaboration is something that's kind of coming to the surface for me here. Madison and Gallatin counties, they've also recently entered into, an agreement for emergency management funding. I guess I'd point this to Patrick or Joe or both of you, whomever would like to field it. But if you could explain a little about what that money is and what it would be used for specifically.
Sure, I can start off and Joe can sure chime in. So basically, when the commissions were talking about, how do we consolidate the services in the area, we also want to make sure that, the equity contributed by the residents on both sides of the county lines was equalized and also add capacity to better serve the overall county, as we're looking to grow. So we were piecing several different functions together. So basically, when that money comes from Madison County to Gallatin County annually, each year as a budgeting process, we'll carve up where that goes to based on what activities we see coming that year. Largely speaking, it's going to operational costs to support our organization as we grow, add employees, to support the different activities that we're doing across the entire county, to obviously include Big Sky. So, for example, fiscal year 23, the year that we just started, some of this funding is going to support salary of a new preparedness and mitigation manager position that we brought on in July. A little chunk of that money will go to help pay for the new vehicle for that employee, as well as a little chunk of that money will probably go to help repair the variable message sign the emergency management has in Big Sky that Resort Tax paid for. Got a bunch of little bulbs that are out that will be fun to repair. Lots of soldering I hear. So it'll support projects like that, in the future. It'll support ongoing costs like fuel, services, stuff like that, but also like to support other specialized projects as they come up. So like this year we were able to give a firefighting slip tank to Big Sky Fire Department that they have on their UTV for down in the community. Now we're dragging the county's hazmat team to cover a little bigger chunk, so I could see using some of that money to help support hazmat team needs as they arise. As well as, we've had the community notification system that's covered that entire area, but it's been wholly funded by Gallatin County for many, many years. So as new things come up or we need to make changes to that, I could see little pieces of that money used to help pay for some of those adjustments for that system.
Got it. Joe Brummel, anything to add there?
Sure. Well, just like the agreement that we put in place, and with any planning, it's a living, breathing document. It's really nice that both counties are progressive enough in their thinking that if something doesn't work in a year or two, we'll sit down, we'll talk about it, and we'll tweak things to make things work right. That's just not only with the interlocal agreements, but that with all emergency planning. If something's not working right, be kind of cognizant enough to where we can switch it and make it work for both communities. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you both for that. Chief Meagard, I bounce over to you here, and this may be anybody could actually speak to this, but it just makes me think of sort of mitigation techniques and fuels reduction. And, Chief Meagard, if maybe you could talk a little about one, the sort of fuels reduction programs that the Big Sky Fire Department is undertaking, and two, do you recommend that people reduce fuels on their own private property?
Yeah, the answer to the last question is absolutely. We will go out and evaluate personal properties to see what their defendable space is. We have a chipper program through a grant that we received. Chief Tatro gets, sorry about that, every year. And we went out and worked in subdivisions with subdivision HOAs to really do some thinning, cleaning. We're partners with Moonlight Basin right now, a big project up along Jack Creek Road for thinning, taking down crown fuels, widening the space to protect Jack Creek Road. Moonlight has been a big partner in that. So yeah, we have a program, Joe, that we're willing to go out and evaluate anybody's personal property. We have a lot of information that if they want to go to our website can get. We encourage anybody and everybody to look at their property. Is it defendable space? What kind of fuel do you have close to your house? Can you get rid of them? Those types of things. So there's a lot of things that private property owners can do to protect their own property. Materials that they choose to build with is a huge deal. So you're seeing a lot of movement all across the western states about, building materials, non-combustible building materials, those types of things. And when you really compare the costs, there's not that big of a difference, depending on the types of materials you use. So when you really look at it, there's a lot of programs out there. There's so much information about what you can do to safely protect your house. It's never a guarantee, but anything you do is going to be better if you have a lot of fuels. I mean, you talk to somebody, Sheriff Springer spoke about the Bridger fire. You talk to some of the homeowners there, thought they were miles away from the fire and how quickly that distance closed. And the types of materials their houses were built out of, they thought they're safe. They came back and the house was completely gone. So there's a lot of things property owners can do on their own to really make sure that they're managing their properties themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good to hear. We're nearing a point where we'd like to move into some audience Q&A, but before we get there, I guess and maybe this is for Sheriff Springer and or Patrick Lonergan. What I've heard you guys talking about, and it seems a important point to reiterate, is that emergencies, disasters, I mean, these things, there's no one size fits all plan. And that's what I've heard you guys talking about. It's situational and it will depend. I guess Sheriff Springer, I'd start with you. Any advice that you'd like to give people in terms of whether it's how to stay calm or how to prepare or how to, stockpile supplies, anything like that, kind of parting words from you?
I think probably one thing that we should send out, and I'll get this up to, I'll bring it up to me tomorrow, is there is a whole packet of information that we would normally hand to someone when we're doing an evacuation from the residence. It lists the items that, you would want to, take with you. There's what to plan. We have a notification like, here, you should be getting prepared for this. When we come back will be the time for you to probably leave. So that gives people a better understanding of what it is that we need them to do in preparation for that. And rather than try to go over it here over the, without reading it, but there's a list of that. And we have all of that stuff in hand. We give those to people. That would be something that we could probably get out, that we should get out a little ahead of time for people to at least see somewhere. And I believe it's on the websites, but if people are interested, Patrick would be able to answer that a little better than I can. But we can, if it's not, we can get that stuff on there. So make sure that they can see it ahead of time if they want, but I'll bring some of that with me tomorrow.
That'd be great. Yeah, Patrick, anything to add there?
No, I think the key is, like many things in life, you should try and be as self-sufficient as possible, as resilient as possible. You know what you need and what your family needs to be self-sufficient. And try and think in those terms and not just in time shopping, wait until the last day your medication runs out to get it refilled, things like that. There are numerous different places that you can get information on the internet and all over the place about, recommended items that you should take with you, that you should have extra of, and they're all very similar concepts. And so I would encourage anybody to, if you're not sure, spend a little time on the internet. You can go to our county websites, you can go to Google all sorts of things and find a variety of information that gives you that general information. And I think the key here is the more prepared the majority of our community is, the easier it will go for everybody and the more load that it'll take off the system. So, if 50% of your community is relatively self-sufficient and they don't have to get out of there that day or the next day for whatever, the winter storm or the volcano or whatever it might be, the earthquake, the easier it will be to deal with those that truly do have an emergency and need immediate help. So look at it as not only, making your family resilient and as well prepared as possible, you're also helping your neighbors and the rest of your community.
Yeah. That's great. Great advice. Much appreciated. Yeah, well, thank you guys. Thank you very much. I guess, Jenny, love to go to you and see if we have any questions from the audience.
Perfect. Also, we've got a few rolling in. The first question is there a map that shows all the alternative evacuation routes from Big Sky, as well as all of the potential safety zones within our community?
Not sure who might be best to field that. I mean, maybe that's you, Patrick, or Sheriff Springer.
Go ahead, Patrick. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to take it?
It doesn't matter. We can take Tim. Go ahead and start, Dan.
So there are some maps out there that show the main evacuation routes. There are some less known ways to get through some of the subdivisions. Some of those are not necessarily a great egress road in the sense that if one vehicle stops, then you've got a line of cars that can't get out and there's no way to turn around. So some of those are not areas that we would want to use in that setting or in that sense. There are safety zones, there's so many different safety zones depending upon what we're talking about. Like you can have a safety zone in your front yard on a wildland fire. It doesn't take an entire golf course to make that happen, right? So there's multiple safety zones. Now, are there gathering spaces like the parking lot at the top of the mountain? Absolutely. Those are well marked. At the base, in the meadow between the golf course and the hospital and the village, those are all areas that would be a safer location. So those are all marked on that map. But as far as there are a lot of safety zones in a wildland setting, say. And Greg, you probably would be able to answer some of that too, because I'm sure you guys have mapped out escape routes and safety zones and all those kind of things in your wildland areas as well.
Yeah, we have, and a lot of them are very consistent with the map that Sheriff Springer's talking about. One of the newer buildings that we have in the town center is the base complex. It's completely non-combustible, has a lot of square footage. I think we could look at adding that as a facility to bring people to coordinate, do things like that. But like Sheriff Springer said, the ski resort parking lots, golf courses, just green open space are good, protected place or evacuation zones.
Thank you guys. Real quick, just is that map available? Is that something that people can access? Maybe Sheriff Springer, is that something you know about?
Yeah, and I would say, I think Danny would know, and Kevin Germain, I think who asked the question, that was given out to the Big Sky Resort Tax Board at our last county meeting. So they might know where that ended up with, up in that area.
Yeah, Dan, are you with us? Is there a way to access that on the BizRad's website or something along those lines?
Patrick, I think Whitney and you were working towards kind of kicking that out. Did it wind up on a website or where?
I don't know the answer to that, to tell you the truth. So I'm not sure where all it's been posted or not posted.
All right, I'll make this promise. I'll get it posted. I'll talk to Whitney. It should be out there somewhere. So I'll send it up to you guys today.
It's great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Joe, if I could add real quick, I think
Sure.
the key here, like a lot of things you said, is it's really hard to say for sure where it's best to go. And I think the advice would be know your community. It's a little harder for the visitors, but those that are living and working there, know the proper names of the actual main roads, know the proper names of some of the key facilities around the community. So when you're told, hey, we want you to go to the day skier parking lot or wherever we're saying we want you to go. We want you to go on Montana Highway 64. Well, do they know that by that term or by the spur road? So the better understanding of the community will help us provide clear directions. And I would also encourage people to register in our community notification system. There's numerous different paths that will push information, but those that are registered in the system have a much higher likelihood of getting quicker and more accurate and focused information on what they are specifically supposed to do based on where they're located.
Can we just let people know how to register with that system?
Yep, the easiest thing to do is go to readygallatin.com. And on that main page, on the very top, it says community notifications. In the center of the screen, it says community notifications. You could also probably Google Gallatin County Community Notification System, and it will tell you what it is, how it works, the options, and how to get registered.
Got it. Awesome. Great. Thank you. I think we're good. Jenny, you got any other audience
Yeah,
questions?
I'll pull another one on, and I'll just kindly ask anyone that is typing into the Q&A to make sure that it's clear who you'd like to answer your questions. Some of these are a little hard to know who it's directed at. We understand that Big Sky is unique, and the one thing I'm not hearing is how that we will communicate with visitors in an emergency.
So I can speak to that a little bit if you'd like. So again, there's no one size fits all. Sheriff Springer's referenced it earlier. So there's a variety of ways that people can get notified, and our mass notification system that we call our community notification system pushes through a lot of different commercial and governmental paths. So when we push a notification, we can push to people that have registered. We can push to any place that has a landline phone. And when I say landline, even an internet-based phone, as well as we can use what's called wireless emergency alerts. So those are like the Amber Alerts that you've seen, likely. That does not require a subscription. We can also activate the emergency alert system, which would trigger, radio stations, television stations, that sort of thing, if they have those devices on, as well as it pushes to a variety of different commercial platforms that pull that data from FEMA. So the most prevalent example of that is Google Maps. If you have the Google Maps app loaded on your phone and you have the emergency alerts enabled on that, and you are located inside the box that we draw, or you drive into that box at some point, Google Maps will go off with the notification too. So there's a variety of ways that people can get information. That some of them require them to take action and enroll, and some of them are automatic. That do not require any sort of action on their part to receive. I will point out, nothing's perfect. It takes multiple different paths to reach multiple different audiences, and we almost always use a very broad approach based on the audience and what tools we deploy.
Interesting. Thank you. I think, Jenny, we probably have time for another one if you've got one queued up.
Okay, perfect. This one is more just response to the question about the map. It is posted on the Gallatin County Emergency Services website. And then I'll dive into one more question. Who evaluates the adequacy of emergency evacuations plan? Is there a rating process, and how does Big Sky's emergency plan rate if there is such a plan, as we are in a one-way in and one-way out type of location?
Sheriff Springer, want to tackle that one, or is this more Patrick, Chief Meagard?
I'm not aware of any particular one that does a rating that I'm aware of. I can tell you that the evacuation process and plans that are put in place by both emergency management and by the sheriff's offices across the state have been very effective. And we've shown that the evacuations have been more than adequate. To my knowledge, we've not lost a single life or in an evacuation process, and we've been doing it for multiple years now.
Got it. Anyone have any final words of wisdom? Anything else to add?
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
So I know this is off key, but it's that time of year. Please clean your chimneys and have them inspected.
Definitely.
And one thing else I'd like to add, Joe, and I should have mentioned earlier, is over the last couple of years, 2 to 3 years, Big Sky Fire has really looked at enhancing our response capabilities for wildland in partnership excuse me, in partnership with Resort Tax on some of our capital purchases. We've added 2 Type 5 engines, and we'll take delivery this weekend of a Type 3 engine specifically for wildland. So when you look at the ability to have access to that apparatus, that's significant. So now we have a Type 6, 2 Type 5s, and we'll have a Type 3 in service here shortly, which gives us our ability to really address some of the wildland challenges that we've been facing.
That's great. That's good to hear. Well, I really appreciate everyone's time. I just want to reiterate, to our audience, it's pointed out by, everyone here, but ReadyGallatin.com is where you can register, for the community notification system. So ReadyGallatin.com, go there, register. It'll help, these guys and, all of our first responders best deliver messaging to the people who need to hear it. What a fascinating discussion. Very helpful, guys. Thanks to all of you for tuning in, and a big thanks to our panelists. I'm Joe O'Connor, managing editor with nonprofit media organization Mountain Journal. And this conversation on local emergency management has been part of the Big Sky Community Week, hosted by the Big Sky Resort Area District and the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce. Check this week's event schedule, the remaining part of the week, and watch the full recording of this conversation, which will be available tomorrow morning. You can check the schedule and watch this full recording at bigskycommunityweek.com. Thank you, everybody, again. Really appreciate it. Danny, Jenny, thanks so much for facilitating and helping us make this happen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You too.